Welcome. You're watching Physical Activity Researcher podcast. Interviews with world-leading physical activity researchers. Welcome everyone. So this is part 2 with Bronwyn Clark, and in the first part we had a very interesting discussion about self-reporting, device-based tools, and how combining these and using Bluetooth technology, GPS, we can get more context about physical activity and sedentary behavior. We can learn about the location indoors with Bluetooth and location outdoors with GPS. Technology is not yet fully ready, but getting there. And then with the self-report, we can learn about feelings, we can learn about who persons are with. But so welcome for the second part, Bronwyn. It's nice to have you here, and you are working as a president of International Society for the Measurement of Physical Behavior. Could you tell more about the society?
Yes, so our society, which is IMPB for short, actually is a fairly new society. It grew out of the international conferences for the ambulatory measurement of physical activity and movement, or ICAMPAM, and there were a couple of ICAMPAMs run that were around really conferences around getting people together to really solve these problems of how we're going to measure physical behaviour. After a couple of conferences, there was a real interest in maybe we should have a society, something that gives more than just a biennial conference. And the society really has a focus on bringing together people from multiple backgrounds, so researchers who work in public health or in clinical fields, and also engineers, device developers, and industry folk. So it really has that multidisciplinary focus of bringing together people to sort of tackle how we're going to measure physical behaviour and how we're going to advance that field of physical activity research, also sedentary behaviour research and sleep research using wearable devices or ambulatory monitoring.
Yeah, that's very, very nice to have such a society and the events. And you probably haven't had the events in a while due to COVID, but you will have this year. Could you tell more about this year's conference?
Yes, so this year we're going to hold ICAMPAM in person again. So we had been holding them every 2 years, but we were not able to hold it last year as an in-person event. We did have a small virtual event last year just to keep the momentum going. But this year we're back in person, but we also have a hybrid event this year with a virtual component to our event as well for those who are not able to travel. We're really lucky this year. We're going to Colorado. So we're going to be in the mountains outside Denver at a place called Keystone. And we'll have our physical meeting there. And we'll have a 3-day event plus a day of workshops. We have some really great speakers coming from lots of different backgrounds. And we've got 8 keynote speakers who will be speaking in person, and we'll also be recording the first day where we will have at least 3 keynote speakers that people are able to hear virtually, as well as some content of our symposia and our in-person presentations.
So some of our listeners might be thinking, is this a conference for me? Who do you think it's the best fit? We have probably listeners from different fields and with different backgrounds. Who would you really recommend the conference?
has a wide interest. So anyone who is working in research with physical activity or sleep or generally measuring physical behaviour, and they want to work out, well, what is the best way I can do that? What's the cutting edge way that I can measure physical behaviour in my research? And so that's the people who are wanting to put measures into their actual studies. So we have those people who might be interested. We also have people who develop measurement methods who can come and talk about the type of new methods that they've developed and how well those methods work, so that they're able to speak to people who are actually using them in their research studies. We also have those who come and speak about sort of more software or algorithm development, and so that, researchers who are working in the field, how am I going to actually make the most of using the data that you get from wearable devices. And so we have those sort of three fields, as well as people from industry who are wanting to kind of promote something that they're able to sell as well. So there's a huge variety of people that come along to the conference, but it's a real intersection between sort of development of measures, users of measures and how they use them, and sort of industry as well.
And how do you see the measurement of sedentary behavior, physical activity, and sleep? It's quite common in certain fields of research. Where do you feel that what fields of research are underutilizing? They are maybe not using either the self-report or device-based. What do you see as the kind of with the big potential that are not measuring yet at the moment too much?
So maybe not measuring or just starting to measure. We've got a huge growth in people using these for sort of examination in sort of clinical trials or drug trials, real industry-based, evidence-based effectiveness of trials. I think this is a really new area, and in fact, one of our invited keynote speakers is Dr. Matthew Diamond, who's from the Federal Drug Administration in the US, and he's talking about how we can use devices in clinical investigations of new medical products, and I think this is an area where researchers in physical activity can really lend a lot of good information on how best to do to carry this out, rather than just pulling a device off the shelf that they know nothing about how to use.
And maybe talking a little bit about the rationale behind using measurements in clinical and drug trials. So could you explain for me and the listeners, why is it important to use this kind of advanced technologies in these trials?
I think because the information you get is objective. It's not someone telling you how they feel or how much walking they're doing, or how their physical function is, in terms of how well they feel. People who have sort of a clinical disorder that affects their movement, having an actual objective measure of how that is changing. So I think, for example, people who have, say, Parkinson's disease, actually having an objective measure on how their ease of movement or their frequency of movement is changing based on say, a medication they're taking. I think that's really important, rather than just asking them, because it's very hard for people to remember. I know, having done work on questionnaire measures, for people to remember how much movement they're doing or how much sitting time they're doing. So having that ability to use ambulatory measurement is really going to advance the field.
And is it now mainly done with the self-report that, for example, if you want to test the effectiveness of sleep medication in a trial, they are actually asking how did you sleep, how much did you sleep, and not actually measuring it?
So they might measure, but for short term. And so this is another advance too, in that, so I'm thinking, for example, for sleep, you might only go in for an overnight sleep study. Now that's only going to tell you about that night, and it's only going to tell you about what you did in that sleep study environment. But having sort of well, I guess sleep's not ambulatory, but having a measure that you can use within your own home and you can use for a longer period of time is going to give a much more information on how so, for example, sleep has actually changed.
Yeah, I've been once in a sleep study myself, and there was baseline and then follow-up, and I remember that I was actually sleep deprived in the second point for some reason. There was something happening. I slept like a baby, and I don't know if I destroyed the whole research setup because I was sleep deprived. They asked it, but I was just thinking it was a small study of maybe 10 participants, and I knew that I just slept for other reasons so deep. So I think it's a good point that we really need more data than just one night in the lab. It's much more needed. How much do you think we need data? Often the physical activity is measured 7 days. Weeks are different. The weather are different. For example, it might be rainy week. It's probably different than a sunny week. How much do you think we need data to really get the optimal results?
So I think there are smarter minds than mine working on this, and I know that that people have done a fair bit of research on how long you should wear a device to get a picture of usual behaviour. But if you're in an intervention that's changing all the time, that may actually be quite a much longer period that you need information about, because usual behaviour is changing. So, you know, if we say we only need 7 days, 8 days of monitoring to get a picture of usual behaviour, but people's behaviour is changing over time, then we probably need much longer period of information about their behaviour. And then that gives an extra layer of difficulty in that, what do we do with all this data? How do we manage all that data coming in from a measurement for a longer period of time? And that's where we need our experts in sort of data management and how to make sense of all the data. We need our software engineers and our experts in sort of algorithm development and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so my question a while ago was about underutilized research fields, and you said the clinical and drug trials. Do you see other fields that are kind of underutilizing these?
I don't know. One that really comes to mind, and this isn't necessarily fields, it's more in our reach into other, into sort of lower and middle income countries, where the ability to use even the methods that we have is limited because of the cost of these things. And I think we're really underutilized in that way. And one of the ways I'd like the field to develop is to come up with more inexpensive methods for measuring physical behaviour that can be used worldwide, so that researchers have that that capability in not just a sort of wealthy Western countries.
We have quite a bit of bias in the knowledge that we mainly measure from people from countries with the good income, and most of the people work in the office and not physical jobs. So it's very different. For us, it shows that sitting is not good, and we need to be more active. While in some countries, it might be even vice versa.
And we need to know that information, and we don't yet.
Yeah, that's true. And you mentioned that you have 8 keynote speaker. One is from track administration, and what are the other themes of the keynote speeches?
So we have a couple of speakers who come from a public health background. So we have Mai Chinapore, who's from Amsterdam, and she's been quite a good researcher in physical activity research, I think mostly with children, and she's going to talk about her experiences in using activity monitors in physical activity research. We've also got Imin Lee, who's from Harvard Medical School, and many people will have heard of Imin. And she's going to talk about using accelerometers in those very large-scale studies for epidemiology. We've also got some speakers who are coming from more clinical backgrounds. So we've got Robert Moschel, whose interest is in multiple sclerosis and using measures, using wearable measures for looking at function in multiple sclerosis and other neurological diseases. And Faye Horak, who has an interest in clinical areas with Parkinson's disease. And Steve Rabinovich in older adults with falls. So we've got some sort of more specific populations as well there. And then we've also got Rick Troiano, again, back to sort of a public health and epidemiological field, who's worked for many, many years at the National Cancer Institute and was really involved in using accelerometers with NHANES, so one of the very earliest really large population-based studies using accelerometers. And he's going to give us not such a history lesson, but a look back through the ages of using accelerometers. So that will be great as well. And we have one more person looking at disease detection too, and that's Jessalyn Dunn from Duke University. And she's going to look at can we use these wearables to detect early onset of diseases, which I think is another area where we really have a possibility of developing in the future for using wearable devices.
So very interesting keynote speakers from different, you have neurological conditions, large scale studies, and wearables, kind of future of wearables in detecting onset. So sounds like a very, very good event. What else do you have in the event? You already mentioned that it's a hybrid. What do you have? Student things. What else do you have in the conference?
Yeah, so we'll have student prizes. So there are prizes for students who are present in person, an oral presentation. We have a prize for a poster presentation, and we have a prize for a virtual poster presentation too. And I believe part of their prize, they will get some money, but they'll also be part of this podcast. So that's something to really listen out for in the future. And I think a really great thing. As I mentioned, Ollie, this is my first podcast, and I'm definitely a late beginner, but it's a really good thing for people who are just starting out in their early careers to be involved in something like this and really start getting their research out there to a wider audience.
Yeah, and with this podcast, we want to support the early career researchers. We try to get them also as guests, so we kind of hear also the researchers in the beginning of their journey. And I think it's a good experience talking about your research findings, and you never know, somebody might find out that they like doing this and they might do their own podcast. We had like one example, like students were just kind of, they had to do one podcast episode for their kind of student work, and they got excited, so they made their own podcast. So I think it's kind of nice when some people notice, I can actually do this myself and just publish the episode. So I think it will be very, very interesting. Yeah, could you tell the basics of the conference? You already mentioned the place, but maybe if you repeat the dates, the location, and how do people find more information?
More information. So I've just got the dates beside me. So the conference goes from the 21st to the 24th of June in 2022. And as I said, in Keystone, Colorado. If you want to to join, come along in person or join the virtual conference, really just Google ICAMPAM 2022. There's not that many ICAMPAMs out there. It's a very unusual acronym, and so you will come up with that first. And that will give you on our website a whole lot of information about our speakers, but also about the workshops that we'll be running, how the program runs. In brief, it'll be a day of workshops and 2.5 days of keynote presentations, symposia, and oral presentations and posters. And there's still an opportunity, if you want to present your research, to put in for an abstract, although only a couple of days. Our abstracts close on the 20th of May. So you'd have to get one in pretty quickly to get an abstract in. But still worth coming, even if you aren't able to put in an abstract, because a lot of good information will be presented.
Yeah. So anyone listening and thinking, check the website. I believe Colorado will be a nice place to be. So what are you presenting yourself in the conference?
So I'm going to present, as I spoke before, my interest is in getting self-report information as well as wearable devices. And so I'm talking about some data that I collected from people wearing a thigh-worn monitor. So we're able to tell when they're sitting, standing and stepping, and they've had prompted questions on their phone asking about their mood and also who they were with. But I'm going to be presenting about the mood dimensions and how that related to whether they were sitting, standing, or sitting for long periods of time, and how much time they were stepping. And we had some really nice findings.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And if we go to the early career thing, jump onto those. You have had a research career already, and what would be your best tips for young researchers who want to work in academia and build a research career?
I think my first and foremost tip is to talk to other researchers, and this is not just your colleagues around you, but to not be afraid to go and speak to more experienced researchers, those ones that you admire their research. I've found that more experienced researchers or more senior researchers are really quite happy to speak to early career researchers, and this gives an opportunity for you to express your ideas, because as an early career researcher, your ideas can be really amazing to that senior researcher as well, but also to develop a rapport with someone who has spent more time in research and possibly will provide that kind of mentoring relationship for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Talking to other researchers. Do you have any way how to do it? Of course, if you are physically in your department and you meet someone in a coffee table, it's easy to start discussion. But researchers are busy, and arranging a time for a call might be difficult. What would you say as a way of starting an informal discussion? How do we do it?
Well, I'm a big fan of conferences, and I think it's been very sad that we have not been able to have those in-person events in the past, for the past couple of years, because at a conference you're away from your desk, and so you have that opportunity to have those informal discussions, or those discussions with researchers from all around the world. And I think it's really a great venue for stimulating those conversations and those ideas. It's not always possible to go to conferences. They're expensive. So I think that making the effort to attend things, to attend talks and to ask questions and be involved actively involved, like being an active listener in those sorts of events, I think that's a really good way to make a connection with other researchers, whether it's the researcher who's giving the presentation or other researchers who are asking questions as well. You can make a connection that way too.
Mm. Yeah, and actually, I test my idea with you. I have had an idea for maybe 6 to 12 months that
Yeah.
I would make in Twitter. You have these things called rooms. I don't know, most people don't notice it, but it's basically an audio space, an audio event that I could build. That it's, for example, on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Greenwich time, for example, and anyone can just click on Twitter. They jump there. When they come in, their microphone is muted, and there will be some amount of people discussing, and then you can unmute yourself and take part in the discussion. You can jump out. So I'm thinking that maybe I should make a 2 hour slot where we could discuss, I don't know, anything related to research, or it would be just researchers, it could be early career researchers. It would be nice if we would get some more experienced researchers. Somebody could ask for looking for a job, somebody could ask for advice or whatever. What do you think? Do you think this could work?
Yeah, I think, and searching for these ways of doing things in a virtual world is, I think, really important. What I do find, and I think it could work, but what I do find is that when you have a number of people and you're jumping in to say something, there's all these false starts. So if there's some way, I know the hand up doesn't always work, but if there's some way of kind of you press a button, like almost like the buzzer, so you're in to say something and no one else can jump in if you've pressed that buzzer. I don't know how you would manage that.
Uh, yeah, and I asked about the best tips for young researchers. What would be mistakes to avoid early in a research career? What not to do?
I think it's a real mistake when researchers start out and they just follow what they've been told to do completely. So they're given a topic that they should research and they're told how to do it, and they don't step out of that that kind of pathway. I think that it's really important that you right from the beginning start developing your own ideas and expressing your own ideas, and realizing that while sometimes they might be a red herring, it's really important to have that ability to think and come up with things out of that kind of out of the box, if you know what I mean.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. And I learned that in some countries, when you applying for certain positions, they might be calculating the amount of articles done not with your supervisor, that your supervisor is not included. So it's important to do
Ah,
studies also in some countries at least, that you don't always have the same person there supervising you. Yeah, and you said that Neville Owen was your supervisor, and he has been also in the podcast. And I asked him that what are the tips for building a research career, and his tip was that be consistent, that kind of choose a theme and stick with it. That don't go all over the place. That you are expert on something. And I asked, like, would Leonardo da Vinci then wouldn't get the PhD position from him, and maybe not. So I think that was interesting that he
actually,
mixed
that's
it.
very funny that Neville should say that, because he was definitely one for dropping the red herrings that would send you off on a tangent. So, and that maybe he was just testing us. But yes, developing your own area, not necessarily what someone else has told you to do. I think that
Mm.
that's important.
Yeah, and then you are a woman leader. You have had a successful research career. Do you have any specific advice for being a woman researcher in academia?
I think take advantage of the. I'm finding that there are more, and this it won't be the case for all universities, but there are more opportunities out there that really are specific for women, and I think take advantage of those and don't feel guilty about it. I think you just you follow your research career and you take all of the opportunities that are available to you. And I think don't necessarily see some of the things that are given, opportunities that are given to you, such as flexible work or part-time work. Don't see them as necessarily being bad or being detrimental to a research career. I think that a lot of people have very successful research careers working. I have worked a lot of my research career part-time, and it hasn't been to my detriment at all. So I think taking those opportunities and making them work for you is a really important thing to do.
Yeah, good points. And how did you feel working part-time? Because sometimes working, for example, just 80%, you get just 80% of salary, but still actually you need 100 or 120% of work to do. Did you feel that your workload really decreased, and did you have to do actively something that the workload was actually decreasing?
I have been fairly good at just doing what I think I'm capable of doing. I wouldn't say in the part-time hours, and I know that this is the case with most people in academia. That don't just work the hours that are set of you. So I definitely don't do that, but I do less than a person who works full-time. And so I think just making sure that you can parse out what you are doing and plan. You have to be a good planner. Plan out what you are doing to fit in for what would be expected, perhaps in the part-time hours is important. But there are advantages to working part-time as well, because you have longer. So I've had longer to complete my fellowship than I would have if I'd taken it full-time. And that means that there's, lead time for papers and those sorts of things haven't been as much of a problem for me because I'm working part-time during that time. So there's advantages to working part-time as well, except for earning less money. That's not an advantage.
And how do you see being a researcher? There's a lot of tasks. There's I think quite a lot of burnout, and then for women there's also family life, maybe small children, especially when you are at the time when you would need to show your skills, build the CV that you can get a permanent position, a professorship. How do you see this situation? Do you have any ideas how the situation could be improved?
Yes, so I think this is a real problem, because the time that you're working really, really hard at the beginning of your career, that is often the time when people have children as well, which take up a fair bit of time. I think it's really important that if you're going to have children, you have a really honest discussion with your partner about who's going to do what, but still to remain flexible, because sometimes that doesn't work out. So have an honest discussion about what help you're going to need or what help they're going to give, but then be flexible if something goes wrong. I think that's really important. I give this advice though because I didn't actually do it. So, it's really good advice. And I think probably what I've ended up more doing is going, oh my goodness, I need you to do something, at the last minute. Luckily, my partner's quite understanding, so that works out quite well. But I think those years where you are in childrearing, and this isn't just for women, this is for men as well. I think you have to be really honest about and have those open discussions about what help you need and when you need someone to take over something for you.
So that was kind of good advice for on the personal level. Do you have any ideas how we could improve this on academia? Maybe how supervisors should do things? Maybe the deans of the department. How could we do it on a higher level?
I think there's got to be a lot more flexibility in how things are done. And I can see this changing already. And in some ways, perhaps the pandemic has forced this change as well, where if you need to have a supervisory meeting, you don't actually have to come in and meet in person. There's that possibility of having that online. So, your child can still be there with you. You can still be supervising them. I also would really like to have the universities provide better childcare services, so people are able to, say, continue breastfeeding while they're still going back to work for um, actually on campus and those sorts of things. I think we really need much better and more flexible childcare services too, and possibilities of working from home during school holidays, all those times where I found it really difficult to get care for my children. I think there's got to be a lot more work done in that to support parents in the workplace, in any workplace, but also in
Mm,
universities.
mm. Yeah, I think it's good that we have moved more for the video calls. It has
Mm,
many advantages, and I think we also need to change the culture that you don't need to have the camera on all the time. Like maybe you can do breastfeeding, put the
mm,
camera off,
mm,
and still you can listen, you can contribute, saying something when you have time. And anyway, if it's more people in the meeting, I think it's kind of waste of time if everybody is concentrating fully when they can actually just do some things at the same time and still be listening. People say that multitasking is not good, but we can do home chores at the same time and still be concentrating fully listening.
mm.
Yeah. So this has been a very interesting talks with you about the technology, measurement technology, about the society and the upcoming conference, and also about these tips for young researchers and women researchers. Is there any final remarks you would like to say before we wrap up the episode?
Uh, no, maybe just from my point of view with ISMPB, I think that there's huge advantages to researchers being involved with a society like ISMPB or whichever society really suits you. That really opens those opportunities for collaboration, for furthering science, and for furthering research fields. And so I would encourage people to be not just thinking of their own small world in research, but to look outside and become involved in their societies.
Mm. And in case of your society, what possibilities there are to be involved, and how people can learn about those, and maybe how to take steps to be involved more.
Also, I guess coming to the conferences and taking part in our various inter-conference activities. So perhaps we have workshops and so forth in between conferences that people are able to attend. But also, it's possible to be involved in the society by helping out on one of the committees. So we have our communications committee has a newsletter and a social media group who tweet on our behalf. That's a way that particularly young researchers who are active in social media could be involved. The newsletter is a way that people who have an interest in sort of writing could be involved in writing the quarterly newsletter. You can also become involved in the board as such. And so we're currently having elections for board members, and we have 4 positions vacant or coming up for vacancy at our board elections that will be held at our ICAMPAM. And so if people were interested in nominating for the board, if they were members of ISMPB, that's a way to become very involved in the society and the direction of the society.
All right, so good opportunities. Yeah, thank you. This was really nice talking with you, and really great insights for many things. So thank you for taking the time for this podcast, Bronwyn.
Nice to meet you, Ollie. Thank you.